What you're going to hear about today is nothing short of a miracle. It's dramatically new, made possible only through years of research, inventions, and innovations.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
Welcome to Pack Unleashed. Today I am joined by my guests, Matt and John.
Are we guests now?
We are guests.
So much energy.
Okay, guys, I think that brings us to an end.
It's the most tremendous experience you can have.
And now, a word from our sponsor.
Hello.
Hello,
everyone.
Welcome to the first ever Product Unleashed.
It's exciting.
The Product Unleashed is a new meetup and community for product people, and we're really excited to have you here today, aren't we, guys?
We are actually
Cue the pub. So before we get fully into the event, I thought it would just be good for you to get to know us, your hosts. We are Pack. My name is John, and I'm joined by Matt and Dominic as well today. So what do Pack do? Can we have the next slide, please, Maestro? Thank you very much. So Pack is a design and innovation consultancy, and we help teams to launch their product ideas and solve big challenges. We also have a very big soft spot for this guy, Flavor Flav, yeah boy.
Yeah, he's a legend. Presentation so far.
Every presentation, he is a master of time, and we love Flavor Flav.
We love a time box, don't we?
How do we help teams doing what we do? Next slide, please, Maestro. We do stuff like design sprints. We help people to build digital products and realize their ideas. But enough about us. Let's roll on to have a little chat about our sponsors and collaborators for the event. That is Silicon Brighton. These guys are doing some amazing stuff in the meetup scene in Brighton and beyond as well. I know a lot of you are joining us from all over the place, and that's totally cool. These guys are doing stuff, tech meetups and all kinds of other stuff. Check them out, siliconbrighton.com. Big thanks to the guys there. Without them, today would not be happening. So thank you very much, guys. SiliconBrighton.com.
Thanks, Silicon Brighton.
Yes, thank you
so
boys.
much.
There you go. Okay, so let's talk about why Product Unleashed. Why did we start Product Unleashed, guys? What's the reasons? Well, they're up on the screen.
Right, we just had to read them.
So listen, there's many reasons why we started Product Unleashed. Here's just a few. We're looking for a great way to bring people together, to work better together. We're looking to bring industry leaders in front of you in the world of, from the world of product. We're looking for kind of peer knowledge sharing. And we just want everyone to bring their knowledge into the community and help us build out the ultimate product toolkit filled with knowledge bombs as well. So that's a little bit about why Product Unleashed. Next slide, please, Maestro. So Here we go. So this is the agenda unleashed for today. So in a few moments, we're probably running about a minute or two behind, but that's all right. We're going to meet our speaker, Richard Banfield, and then he's going to go through his high-performing product team's talk. And then we're going to do a bit of a Q&A curated by us. I bet you can't wait for that. I'm sure it's going to be super duper. It's going to be so smooth. You should definitely stick around for that. And then we've got a little special surprise announcement as well towards the end. So please do stick around if you can.
Free prize, did you say?
I said a special surprise. Special surprise. And then around 1:45, you know, we've got a bit of contingency. We're going to do a mic drop and Pack will be out. So I think it's on to meet our guest then. Next slide, please. Here we go. Richard, here he is. Hello to Richard. So a little bit about Richard before we bring him in. Richard is the Vice President of Design Transformation at InVision. He has authored many books, including Enterprise Design Sprints, Product Leadership, Design Leadership, and Design Sprint. Formerly, Richard was the CEO of product design agency Fresh Tilled Soil. He originally studied biology, and he was a dive instructor on the Islamic Republic of the Comores. Hopefully, I've said that right. So, Richard, are you with us now? Can you hear us?
I am. Yeah.
Hey. Excellent. So Richard, good to have you on. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
No worries. So Richard, where are you joining from us from today?
Just outside Boston. So the other Silicon Center on the coast, except on the other side of the pond. Yeah.
Where MIT is all the smart people.
That's it. That's it. So from Boston to Brighton, and obviously we're English, so we're going to ask you, how's the weather there today as well? What's going on?
It's pretty English. It's overcast and cold. So
just how we like it.
Yeah, you feel right at home here.
We need to move to Boston, guys. We definitely feel right at home there. So let's talk a little bit about your talk, Richard. High performing teams. Tell us a little bit about how the talk came about.
So it's the combination of two things. One is, as you mentioned, I've been authoring books for some time now, and I've been really, really fortunate to be able to talk to such a huge range of hundreds of product people, design people, just generally people in the product space.
Yeah.
So there's all that anecdotal conversational evidence that has come out of that over the last years. But then one of the things that my team does at InVision is we are responsible for the design maturity assessment, which is a product that allows us to go and assess all these amazing companies that we worked with. So everybody from Fortune 500s all the way through to startups. We've done assessments with about 2,300 companies now. So about 8,500 surveys, individual surveys. And so we've got all this evidence, and all this evidence is now like helping us understand that anecdotal stuff has real data to support it. And that's where this talk comes out of. That's all of the evidence from these talks, these conversations, these insights that we get from these from the data, all compiled to like, well, what actually makes a team work?
Yeah, brilliant, awesome. We're super excited.
We can't wait to hear
I mean,
more.
there is one thing I feel that we should bring up first.
Go.
That hat. You have out-hatted John, which is a rare thing.
I went pretty minimal today. But you've got
Well, I mean, you had you got the Flavor Flav slide up, and I was like, well, come on, let's get it all happening.
Right, when you see us next, we're all going to be in
We're like,
Oh, there we go. That's it. That's it, Richard.
Shall we do this, guys?
Let's go.
Yeah, let's do this.
Cool. I think it's talk time then. Thank you everyone for joining us. We're going to hand over to Richard now for his talk, and then after the talk, there's going to be an amazing Q&A, and then some special announcements and stuff. So, without further ado, over to you, Richard. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Excellent. So the talk's called Organizational Underwear, and it's a little tongue-in-cheek because the idea here, of course, is that we're looking at the things that happen behind the scenes, the things that are not obvious to all of us as we go through our day. And what our work has allowed us to do, our research and our investigations and our interrogations into these companies, has allowed us to look deeper into these teams than we ordinarily would see on a day-to-day basis. So I'm going to share a lot of that stuff with you. And I'm hopefully going to expose a little bit about what makes a great team work. So the big idea behind this is that nothing gets done by the individual anymore. It doesn't really matter whether you're an individual contributor and that's your title. You're working with a team, you're working with others, you're taking inputs from other people, you're pushing outputs to others, and you're collaborating and cooperating to get stuff done. And that might seem like an obvious statement, but think about how difficult it would be to do anything by yourself. So the skills that we need to have as team players are really critical now. It's an interesting, complex space that we live in right now. And the reality is, it's hard to work with other people. It might seem like one of those statements that you say, no, I work with people every day, but how many of those interactions are positive interactions or interactions that you can feel good about? How many teams have you met that are always doing the right thing and just crushing it? And the answer is not many of them. They're all struggling. They're all trying to do their best, but we don't really know how to work with each other, especially now that we've got all this change going on, COVID, or almost post-COVID world that we're in now. And all of the inputs from that are leading us to have to adjust the way we work and make new affordances for the things that we do each day to get through this, just a normal day, just like working with other people. And one of the things that strikes me as being a key challenge for anybody right now is trying to understand what it's like to put a good team together and then keep that team assembled in a way that maintains and sustains the positive working environment that's required for us to actually ship product. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So as I mentioned in the intro, we did this design frontier, the new design frontier research, and we've been able to add to that over the last couple of years and just increasingly get more and more data on what it actually means to be a working, high-performing team. So why is it difficult to work together? Well, the big thing, of course, is that we have to get alignment on so many different things. Like we got to get, aligned on where we're headed, like the vision, the mission of the company, the product itself. We've got to have agreements around how we're going to structure our teams, what kind of principles or values we're going to use, what methodologies we might have. And then, of course, all the utilities and tools that we're going to need to get stuff done. We've got to agree on all this stuff. So it's just a lot. It's a ton of stuff that we have to figure out together, and we have to do it over and over and over again, right? These are not agreements that you just make once and then move on. These are agreements that you have to work on a lot. So we're going to focus on those kinds of agreements. We're going to focus on what team agreements are required. And then we're going to talk about how those teams get to a point where they can say, hey, let's actually do this more often. Let's do this kind of agreement stuff, this alignment stuff on a more regular basis, because even though it feels a little messy, it's actually working. So what kind of agreements are required for us to do the work we need to do? Well, we got to agree on what metrics we're going to use, how we're going to measure ourselves. We've got to work around a planning horizon. In other words, a roadmap. What are we going to do each day or each week or each month? How are we going to shape the work that we have? Experiments. Are we going to run them? Are we going to do design sprints? Are we not going to do them? How are we going to figure out what we need to know before we start the work? So what kind of research are we going to adopt either from the market or our own research to make our team smarter and, as Shane Parrish says, less stupid about the work we do? And then how are we going to interpret that research? What kind of insights are we going to gather from that? What are we going to focus on? And what trade-offs are we going to make about which of those insights to act on? And then ultimately, how do we communicate all of this to each other and to the stakeholders and to the customers and everybody else that we need to communicate with? So if you think that all of this stuff is easy, then just ask yourself how easy it is to get agreement when you live with somebody else on something as simple as this. And this might be a little tongue-in-cheek, but little agreements are the things that build ultimately a successful, high-performing team. So if you can agree on something as simple as this and have a way for you to discuss that and communicate that in a constructive way, then you'll find that you actually are able to do the big things as well. So how you do the small things is ultimately how you do the big things as well. So let's start with a premise here. And this is something that comes up a lot in the research. And what we notice is these teams are really high performing because they trust each other. So there's this underlying foundation of trust. And that doesn't mean that they started there. Very often they started with a lot of mistrust or misunderstanding, but ultimately they get to a point where there's deep trust. And in order for these teams to work, that trust is a requirement. So I want to emphasize this. We'll come back to this a little bit later in the talk, but one of the things you really need to be focused on is, are the activities, the agreements, the social contracts that you're working on directed towards building trust? And a simple way to think about this is as a flywheel. Teams need to come to an agreement on what it is that they're going to do and measure and communicate, et cetera. And then they're going to look for confirmation signals. They're going to look for ways to say, yeah, that's working. That agreement is actually something that's sticking, or that is something that everybody is in agreement with and is continuing to behave around that agreement. And they're looking for those confirmation signals. Of course, if they don't get those confirmation signals, then you get a breakdown in trust. And as this moves around, the more confirmation signals you get, the more likely you are to have an expanding trust. And that expanding trust leads you to then take those small agreements and expand on them and make larger agreements. So this also means that your appetite for risk increases as well. So you might start with small decisions that allow you to manage small amounts of risk, but then as that trust increases, you're then willing to take bigger bets and expand your trust. And that ultimately leads to new agreements, and those new agreements lead to more confirmation signals, and that drives the flywheel. So this is an important backdrop or a foundation to all of the things we're going to talk about today. And think about this in your own team. Do you have trust? Are you able to create trust? Do you feel like you are behaving in a way that drives trust, or that your team is behaving in a way that drives trust? So these are really important questions for you to ask, and ultimately signals for you to look for. So what are the specific agreements that allow teams to work together? We're going to talk about 4 of them today. Now, there are more, but these are the 4 that come out as being either the most important or the most frequently observed. So interpret that the way you want, but these are the 4 agreements that we see most commonly in these high-performing teams. So the first one is, there's this shift, right? There's a shift from being just a factory where you just make stuff, a feature factory, as some people describe it, towards actually working towards some kind of outcome, right? So there's a flow efficiency there. And that flow efficiency, it has a lot of characteristics we'll talk about now. But the idea is you're moving from this idea where a human being is a mechanical object that fits into a machine and performs a task, towards a human being is a decision-making vehicle that allows better velocity to happen within your organization. And velocity is, it's not just speed, right? It's speed towards a goal. So I have a 4-year-old, and that 4-year-old can do a lot of speedy things. They just run around in circles, but they're not really going anywhere. So the difference between talking about speed and velocity is a kind of subtle thing, but it's an important thing, where these flow efficient teams talk about moving faster towards an objective versus just moving faster, for the sake of moving faster. So what does this look like? Well, it looks like more interaction between the individuals on the team. So these teams are flow efficient because they're able to discuss and partner with each other in a way that allows more clarified communication, more clarified alignment around all the things that matter within the organization. So they're getting together, they're working together. You're going to talk about how we do that a little bit later. But all of this happens in a cross-functional way. They're bringing the team members together to make sure that there are no silos or breakdowns in the communication. And what's really interesting about flow efficiency is that you can actually see it, right? It's not just an idea, it's something that you can break down and look at and in any team and say, yeah, this team is flow efficient, or this team is not achieving that. They're still resource dependent, or they're focused on being a feature factory. So the things that you want to look at here are, do they respect time? So time is an important constraint for these flow efficient teams. They don't pretend that they can just make up time. They don't have these kind of like ridiculous ideas on, oh, we'll just keep changing the time frame that we're working in. They use time as a constraint and they work backwards from that. They say, well, what do we need to do in this month? And they work backwards from that instead of just starting with a scope and trying to, shape it into the, whatever time is available. They're also inclusive, right? They bring the right people in at the right time. This is both inclusivity from a diversity point of view and also inclusivity from a domain expert point of view. They're bringing in the right people at the right time because they know that that knowledge matters. And in a way, this is a cross-functional type of behavior. They're cross-functional more than just name, though. They're actually bringing all those people together from the beginning, and they're acting in a cross-functional way in which they are communicating cross-functionally throughout the process. They also adopt process, which is very dynamic. So it's time-bound, but it's also dynamic in the sense that it can change and adapt to the environmental changes or the context of the situation. So they might say, well, we're agile, but we're agile-ish, or we're lean, but we're lean-ish. We're using the things that are most relevant to our group or our product or our marketplace at this right time. They're not just taking the dogma from whatever consultant told them to behave in a certain way and doing it just like the book. They're less textbook focused and they're more framework focused. They're also looking at outcomes versus output. So they're not measuring themselves by how many wireframes they created or prototypes they made or how many lines of code they wrote. They're measuring themselves on, did they achieve something that solved a problem? Did they answer a question? Did they deliver something to the customer that the customer actually values? And of course, this means that they're problem-centered, right? They think about the problems deeply. They don't just assume things. And instead of saying, well, we have a solution, let's try and force that solution into our customer's life, they're saying, no, let's actually find out what our customers care about. What is the pain that they're trying to solve? And let's go and figure out what that problem is first before we do anything else. Ultimately, this flow efficiency leads to confidence. Confidence the team can then use to create more trust. And what's really interesting about this is that the research shows that this is a common practice amongst all these high-performing teams. And of course, you can practice this in a design sprint. Now, I'm biased because I've been working on design sprints for some time, but design sprints are actually a nice little a mini version of flow efficiency that anybody can try out or practice in a very short space of time. So on average, design sprints tend to be about 4 or 5 days. Some are even shorter now. But just think about that. You can practice an entire flow efficient operation in just a week. So you can see what it looks like. You can see what it feels like. Your team can get immersed in this, feel that confidence, and then say, oh yeah, that's something we want to do more often. That's something that feels good. Let's then go beyond this. So a design sprint isn't an elixir to all your problems, but it's a way for you to immerse yourself in that experience so you know what flow efficiency looks like. And then once you've experienced that, you can go and try that on more often. So the next thing that we see in these high-performing teams is that they start together, right? They are working from the beginning as a group. So that means that, let's say you're a bank and you've got a regulator on your team. Don't wait until that regulator, is at the QA process and trying to just kind of sign off on something that you've been working 6 months on. Bring that regulator in, have that person sit on the team in that very, very first meeting. Have your QA people, have your engineers sit in on those design meetings so that everybody can get aligned very early on. Now, it might feel a little bit expensive to have everybody in those meetings, in those early meetings at the beginning, but that alignment in the beginning helps you create more velocity throughout the process. Getting that understanding means that you will have more communication, better communication, and more understanding of where you're ultimately going. So the way to think about this is like this. So let's assume you're using the double diamond model. You've got some discovery work, you've got the definition work, obviously then moving into development and delivery. Often the model looks like this in a textbook, but in reality, it looks more like this, where you're spending less time in discovery and less time doing definition, kind of rushing into those designs, rushing into solving a problem. And then all the burden is on engineering and development to actually make those things right. And that means that engineers are stressed, right? So you're breaking down trust here. making them take on the burden of all the work that should have been done up front. Instead, bring all those people that are part of that development, engineering, and delivery process and put them at the front and say, hey, let's talk about what might actually happen further down the line. So what you see is this, right? You see that alignments that don't happen at the beginning lead to big problems at the end. This is a kind of a, a typical furthest metaphor before. If you launch a rocket and it's 1 inch out of calibration when it leaves the Earth, by the time it gets to where it's supposed to be, it's going to be miles and miles apart from its destination. And that's exactly what we're doing with these teams, is that we're not getting alignment at the beginning. So we're actually asking the team to bear more of the burden further on. And then that's breaking our time boxing. That's breaking our commitments that we've made and our social contracts that we've made to each other about when we're going to deliver. So ultimately, getting a little bit more expensive at the beginning and working together at the beginning helps everybody get better trajectory, but even better velocity through this process. Third thing is, these teams really spend a lot of time investing knowledge, relationships about each other. Like, who am I actually working with here? Who are these people that I need to be passing work back and forth from? They're doing this with their customers. They're doing it with their teammates. They're doing it with their stakeholders. They're really getting to know them. They interview them. They ask them questions about, what drives them, what motivates them, what are their incentives, what are the things that they care about, what are their dreams? Like, you really get into it. These teams get to know each other really, really well. And I think we're losing a little bit of that. I think COVID hasn't made it any easier with all the remote work. But again, it feels expansive because we're spending a lot of time getting to know each other, and that's time we could be doing, writing code or pushing pixels. But honestly, it's time well spent, because getting to know each other really helps us then get aligned, right? And we also start to have a language through which we can communicate. So if I'm not spending time with engineers, then really I don't know what they're talking about when they're describing things or using terminology that I need to understand, and vice versa. So designers need to speak to engineers and developers and QA people, so that we're actually not just speaking the same jargon, but actually speaking the same language in terms of, like, what are we trying to do with each other here? What are we actually making? What are the outcomes that we're seeking? So this is kind of an important point to pause on and just take a moment. We're not talking about making sure that everybody has consensus, right? We're not saying, oh, everybody has to agree on every little detail. What we're saying is spend time collaborating and cooperating, because that will ultimately lead to better decisions. Now, not everybody is going to agree on every single thing that we do. That's okay. We're not looking for some kind of, purely consensus-driven approach. What we're looking for is the opportunity for people to share their ideas, to have a voice, for those, introverts amongst us, for us to be able to share what we think, so that then all of us can understand why that's important, why it's important to that individual or that domain or that area of the work, and that we can get better alignment on that. Okay, finally, decisions. All of this really leads to better decision-making, right? If you're trusting each other, you're more likely to make better decisions. If you are aligned, you're going to make better decisions. If you understand each other and you understand each other's work, you're going to make better decisions. But it's really not enough until you've got a way of framing those decisions. And there are lots of different ways to do this. My favorite way to do this right now is what's called the decision stack. I borrowed this from Martin Erickson, who is my co-author on product leadership. And the idea here is to give more structure to the decision-making, so that when leaders aren't present, or just leads on a project aren't present, that everybody else is still empowered to make the decisions that they need to make every single day. So think about it like this. A decision stack is really, are we aligned on every single part of the work that we've got ahead here? Do we have a clear vision? Do we know what it is? I did a talk at a conference a few years ago, and there were about 1,200 people in the audience, and I offered money for somebody to stand up and repeat out loud the company vision and the values, and only one person stood up. And I think that's kind of not unusual. I think that a lot of us really don't know what the company vision is or the company strategy. We don't really know what the OKRs and goals are. And of course, We need to get aligned around our specific team's work and our specific scope, and then what underlines that, which is the principles and values of our work. So this is a decision stack. I'm going to show you an example of how this actually works in real life. So think about that decision stack in terms of, that pyramid of things that you need to understand and get alignment on. I'm going to use this example, which we use here at Envision for the way that we drive our decisions here. And we have to start with a mission, and we ask ourselves, hey, we're about to do this thing. It might be a feature, it might be a brand new product, it might be something small, but we say, well, what is the mission? Are we aligned with the mission? If the answer is yes, no problem, then we can move on. If it's no, then don't do it, right? Like if it's not aligned with the mission, then we're probably wasting our time and we're probably going to get shut down at some point anyway. So then once we've aligned with the mission, we can move on to the strategy. It's obvious now how this works, right? You see that as you go through each part of that decision stack, you're really just asking yourself, are we aligned? Are we actually clear about this thing? And if we don't know what that thing is, maybe we don't know what the mission is, we need to go and investigate. We don't know what the OKRs or the KPIs are. Go and investigate those things. Each point allows you, whether you're an individual or a team, to be able to figure out, are you aligned? If you're aligned, then it's easier to make a decision. So basically what you're saying is, great, if you've got alignment on everything, then you can take action on that particular decision. If you're not aligned on those things, then don't do it. You're wasting everybody's time because it's going to get shut down anyway. So that decision matrix, that decision stack, plus something as simple as like writing a one-pager is a very, very easy framework that we know works because these high-performing teams are using that. So try that, and that'll help you and your team get aligned really quickly on these things. So what do we learn here, right? Flow efficiency is important. We know that friction is the enemy, and we are not just mechanical objects that fit into a factory. We need to be seen as decision-making, people. We're people who make great decisions, and we're creative, and we've got great ideas. So let's bring that into flow efficiency. Basically, what we're doing, we've learned that flow efficiency is really important, right? We want to make sure that we are aligned on that. We want to make sure that we're starting together, working together, continuously sharing and aligning throughout the process. So not just cross-functional in name, but actually cross-functional in the way that we show up and behave and communicate every day. We also learned that it's really, really important that all of these activities lean towards building trust. Right? That's the thing that creates confidence, that the thing that feels good for the team and for the organization ultimately is believing that they can trust and rely on the people on their team. And then ultimately, decision-making speed and decision-making accuracy is really important through that trust-building process, through that increase in velocity, because the better decisions we make, the more accurate those decisions, the less stupid we are. And ultimately, that's the goal, right? We want to make fewer risks. We want to make fewer mistakes. We want to make the right kind of mistakes. If we're going to make mistakes, let's do them in an experimental environment where we can actually learn from those things instead of finding out 6 months into the project that we should have made a decision early on. And then also, it's probably obvious to everybody, but this isn't easy stuff, right? It's easy for me to present this and say, go and do it, but it takes time. It takes a little practice, and it takes effort on the behalf of the whole team to make it worth doing. It's just not something that's going to happen immediately. So try out little ways to do this, experimental ways, like a design sprint. That's a great way to experiment with the way that we've just discussed, where you're working in harmony with the whole team to create an outcome. And try that on for size and see if that works for you. And then you can start building on that. And don't expect this to happen overnight. It will take a little long, more than a couple of days. So ultimately, what I want to finish with, and I want to say is, this feels a little counterintuitive and expensive and messy at times, but it does work. We have the evidence, we have the research that backs it up. Take time, invest in your team, get to know them, invest in aligning yourselves, and ultimately that'll lead to high velocity. And that is it.
Thank you very much, Richard. That was brilliant. Sorry, everyone, for the slight technical hitch with the slides there. But ever the professional, Richard, you absolutely wrote it out brilliantly.
I was
To be honest, we were like, is he meant to be?
Yeah, is this like
You did such a good job.
That's it. So guys, what time is it? What time is it?
It's time for the Q&A, John.
It's time for the Q&A.
It's time for the Q&A.
Cool. Okay, so we have a few questions in the Q&A. Okay, so Craig Laws asks, when is the right time in an organization to bring in a specific role, e.g. a head of product, and who is ultimately responsible for ensuring teams in an organization are working in this way?
Oh, wow, that's a really good question. And there's obviously no like generic answer for this. I think, Craig, one thing you would probably want to do is understand very clearly what stage the company is in. And I'd say even before that, you want to ask yourself, is this product the company? So if you're really early stage, product and the company are somewhat indistinguishable, right? So you're just figuring out who you are, what the company is. As companies increase in size, they may have multiple products. And if they've got multiple products, then you've got this portfolio of things that you need to consider. So depending on the size of the organization, you're going to have to think about, do we actually need this person right now? What I do notice is that teams that hire too quickly, in other words, they're hiring senior people from other big companies. So let's say you're a small company and you go, hey, feels like we need a product lead. And they're going to hire some like VP of product from some company that's been doing it for years and years and years. That might not be the ideal way to do it, depending on what kind of company you are. If you're venture funded and you're high growth and you can afford to make those kinds of hiring choices, then that's great. But for the most part, you really need to think about, do we need this right now? Is this valuable for our team right now? Is this person going to drive velocity? Are we going to have increased trust and alignment because of this new role? Or, are we just hiring this because we think we should have this? So I think really it's back down to like, does this help us get the trust, agreement, alignment, all those things that we need, versus do we need to just put a bum in a seat? And that would be more of a kind of a feature factory type decision, which is like, oh, we just need a whole bunch of bums in seats doing this kind of work, and somehow magically, good things will happen. There was a second part to the question, John. It was something to do with like.
So in an organization where there are multiple product teams, whose responsibility is it to ensure teams are operating as a high performance team?
I think it's everybody's responsibility. Obviously, the leader has the majority of the day-to-day responsibility in terms of like how those frameworks are implemented, or how frequently those communications happen. But the inclusivity part that I mentioned earlier shows that these teams are being supported from all sides, right? So they're empowering everybody on the team to have a voice. They're empowering everybody on the team to have authority. So I think it's really, again, it's a little bit stage dependent, but it's everybody's responsibility. We see that these high performing teams are high performing teams across the entire team. It's not just one individual that's dragging everybody up. Ultimately, the weakest link is the person who's maybe the least mature or the least high performing in that team. And so it's everybody's responsibility to help that person raise their game and understand, how they can contribute to that team.
Hey, right. We've got one from Katie, actually, Katie Marcus, and it's, how do you manage resistance from engineers and others to starting together? I often find complaints of distraction from current work and too many meetings with the Dr. Evil fingers when I try and involve engineers in that what's next in an early stage.
Yeah, so the best conversation you can have on the engineers is, hey, I'd like to spend some time and get aligned on this thing now, or we can deal with this later when like you're deep into it and they're like, there's no time left, and there's, then it's going to get really expensive. So, take that diagram that I showed of like getting alignment early on and showing what misalignment looks like, in the long run, and explain to them, we can either do it now and get aligned and save time, or we can not get aligned now and find out later that we've had misalignments and problems and issues, and we're going to have to deal with those and do a lot of rework. So if we want to avoid rework, let's invest up front and do that. And like I said, this is not a familiar type of conversation for a lot of teams, and this is going to be new to them, and they're going to have to practice this. But don't give up. Just keep asking and keep asking. You know, be the squeaky wheel until eventually those people see the value of what you're doing. It's not like, it's funny, you know, I hear this from designers a lot. They're almost adversarial in the conversation. They're defensive in the sense that they're like worried that the engineers are going to hate them for this. But if you really talk about helping them save time and being more efficient, they're going to get on board anyway, because that's what they want for you as well. They want to be a more efficient team. They want to be saving their own time. So ultimately it's about, you know, sharing that alignment. Like, are we, you know, do we both want to save time? Great, let's do that. Let's invest in this early on then.
Cool. Okay, we've got a couple of others. One from Lisa Logan. So what techniques do you use to make sure everyone's voice is heard in those early planning sessions, especially those who are more introverted?
So this is actually where design sprints can be really helpful, is that the first day that you spend together is where you actually write the rules for engagement. So the entire team writes the rules for engagement. You spend some time saying, how are we going to work together? How are we going to make sure that this is inclusive? How are we going to have every single voice heard? And by writing those together, you're starting with a social contract that those voices are important, you care about them, and that they will be heard. The second part of that is facilitation. So if you're hiring a facilitator, the facilitator will know, you know, if they're professional, they'll know how to do this, and they'll make sure that those voices get heard. If you're new to this and you don't have a professional facilitator, then what you want to do is elect somebody on the team to be a facilitator, and their role is to make sure that all those voices are heard. So it's okay for the facilitator then to say, hey, we've heard a lot from John. He never stops talking. Let's hear from Matt, right? Or Dom never says a word. Let's hear from him. And and that way you're using that as
You've been spying on us, Richard.
You've worked with us, obviously.
You're using that as a way to both get the social contract, you know that this is going to happen, and then you're reinforcing it with that facilitation. And then, Lisa, over time, this will become a normal way for the teams to communicate. They'll actually start noticing that somebody hasn't spoken up or that somebody hasn't been included, and they'll start to encourage those people to speak up. Now, I will say that in my experience, it's a little bit of there's like some, you know, we have a general societal issue around diversity and gender inclusion and things like that. And that's part of this, is that it's very important for us white guys to be allies and make sure that everybody else is being included. So make sure that when you're assembling those teams, that there's diversity in that team. Make sure that those voices are getting heard. Just because it's common for the white guy to have a voice doesn't mean it's okay. And we have to stand up as allies for that and make sure that we're including all of the voices, regardless of what those, what are the backgrounds, what are the perspectives, what are the objectives of those people. We have to hear those voices. Again, feels a little messy, feels like it might waste a little bit of time up front, but it's super, super, super important, and it creates the kind of trust that that team ultimately benefits from.
Brilliant.
Great. That's
great answer.
Yeah, it was a great answer. We've got another one here from Susie Twig. What is the impact on high-performing teams when a team member leaves? And what methods can be used to manage the potential negative impact on the team during the middle of a project?
Wow, really good question. So Susie, I actually just experienced this a few months ago. We've got obviously an amazing team. My design transformation team is amazing. And one of our team members left recently to go and join another company. And it's heartbreaking, right? You've all invested so much time in each other, getting to know each other. And when that person leaves, that definitely leaves a gap. And I think the first thing to communicate is just how much that person means to everybody and how much they're going to be missed and how much you can support them in their transition, because you have to be empathetic enough to know that when that person's leaving that team, they're probably leaving, something that they're super comfortable with and they're like enjoying. And so compassionate, empathetic understanding of where they're going and how you can help them as well towards their goals. But then also just coming together and having that conversation, saying, oh, how is this going to impact us? How are we going to do the work that person did? How are we going to fill that gap? Do we need to fill that gap? Is that a role that we want to maybe sunset that role and create a new opportunity as this group or team or company is growing? So I see all of these changes as opportunities for improvements, opportunities to learn, opportunities to help those fellow team members go on to doing something better, and not necessarily as a failure. Anytime a team is changing, it's an opportunity for growth. It's a time for learning. So we spend time thinking, what did we learn from this person? What did we gain from having them on our team? What does that allow us to do in terms of looking forward, and how we're going to then adjust and frame the work going forward without that person? Maybe, like I said, a replacement or not a replacement. Maybe decide that we don't need that person anymore, that we've now outgrown that work, and now we need to grow into different kinds of work as well.
Cool. Thank you for that one. We've got another question from Simon Emery, and that's: for a team to generate the trust requires, For a team to generate trust requires being able to have difficult conversations. What are the different techniques you've used to facilitate this? This is a good one.
Yeah. I mean, this is my life, right?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
So I'm currently working on a coaching framework that ultimately I hope is going to be a book one day, and it's called Gentle Leader, or The Gentle Leader. And what I've noticed is that difficult conversations are traditionally done without any thought or compassion, right? So let's say you got to let somebody go, or you've got to have a conversation about somebody's opinion or the way that they've shown up or their behavior. We tend to be, we fall into this trap of saying, well, we just have to tell that person. We just have to tell them what they're doing wrong, or maybe in some cases just ignore it completely, but tell that person, and then somehow they're going to adjust their behavior. But I think the conversation that we really need to have is, why is that behavior happening? Why is that thing, whether that's somebody not performing, or maybe it's not being able to achieve certain goals? Why is that happening? And the why questions often lead us to better answers. Like, maybe it's the team culture, maybe it's the leader. I very often look at myself and say, what am I doing as a leader that makes it possible for that kind of behavior to exist? Does that person feel supported? Does that person feel understood? Is this person even the right person for this team? And if not, how can I help them move on to a better role or a better team? And I've very, very rarely had to fire somebody. What I normally do is do some work around that person's personal goals and their career, and find out that maybe we're not aligned. Maybe that person isn't the right person for our team. We love each other, we get on, we collaborate, but they're just not as invested as they need to be, because they've got their sights set on a different kind of path. And in that case, I'll do everything in my power to help that person find a new role, whether it means reaching out to my network, my social media network, or my direct network, and helping that person find the right role. That's a much better way to have a hard conversation than saying, you're not behaving, you're not doing the things that we want. The other key thing is to make sure that these conversations are made objective, using those things like the decision stack or team principles. So that way, I'm not saying, hey, Richard thinks that you're behaving in a bad way, or I don't like what you did there. I can say, you're not doing the things that we agreed to as a team. As a team, your behavior is misaligned with the mission of the company. It's misaligned with the principles that we've agreed to work on. That way, it's not me against them. It's these things were agreed to. These are the social contracts that we co-authored together. And now you're not participating in that. Why is that happening? Is that something that is it a misunderstanding of what those principles are? Is it a misunderstanding of what the mission or strategy is? Or is it just that you don't want to be here and we need to talk about that separately? So making it more of an objective conversation and less about my opinion versus your opinion, it makes those hard conversations much easier.
Awesome. Thanks, Richard. We've got another one from Jack M. With a young team starting with little experiences, what would be the one main thing we focus on? I think design first or functionality was his question.
And Jack, is you saying we also have a core software building a SaaS offering?
Yes.
Small team. So Jack, like I said, you know, at this stage, your company and your product are probably indistinguishable, right? You're pretty much the same thing. It's not like you have a portfolio of things. So you can really get 100% focused, right? You get very, very focused really quickly by asking, you know, what is our vision? What is our mission? Getting that decision stack, something visible and something that's very explicit so that anybody can point to that on the team and say, I know why I'm here. I know what I'm doing here. I know what my role is here. I know what decisions get made every day. I don't think that early stage companies need to have the kind of vision or mission or strategy that is so cast in stone that, you know, like an enterprise might have, or like a 2 or 3 year strategy, because you're still trying to figure that stuff out, right? At this stage, you don't really know what all of those things are, but you still need to express them. You still need to have a version of them, even if it's an early stage version, so that you can say, hey, you know, this is where we're going for now. Until we get evidence that's going to move us or pivot us to another direction, we need to focus on that. So Jack, it's really important to have those conversations. Like, do we know why we're here? Do we know what we're trying to do? Do we have a vision for that? Is it clear what that vision is? That helps you then get that team building the kind of trust and alignment that you're looking for. And then you can build on that, right? So like I said, in that flywheel, you start small and you build on that, build on that, build on that, and you get more aggressive about the risks that you want to take bets on.
Got another one here. We've got another one here from Melody McCord. I think that's how you say it. What are the methods that you apply to create little agreements, and how do you get people to stick to what they've agreed to without being too arduous?
Again, this is a lot about that objectivity, about creating the space for people to have conversations about the kinds of social contracts or agreements that you're having. So, Melody, what I would do then is I'd run something not quite as fancy and time consuming as a design sprint, but I'd do like a day together where you sit down, you know, just get together, work together around those little agreements, have a social contract in the sense that you can actually write those things down. So we often just write them down as principles, or we'll write them down as a charter. And then that becomes the thing that we reference and go back to time and time again and say, well, what was the agreement here? What did we agree to do here? And do we need to adjust that in any way to allow for new evidence or new changes? So the small agreements really are small conversations that get increasingly more and more, they take on more risk. But the small agreements really are just good conversations. And the leader of the team, in my case, it's me, needs to create the space for that to happen, allow for those conversations to happen, surface the tensions by asking hard questions, you know, affirming that everybody understands it, affirming that those voices have been heard, that there isn't dissension, that we do have an opportunity to voice our opinions. Even if we don't agree on every little detail, we still need to have the conversation. I still want to hear what you think. I still want to hear that you have a perspective on something and that we've heard that perspective.
Cool, thank you, Richard. I'm going to sneak a little question in from me, actually, because I'm that kind of host. But you talked in when you were going through everything about alignment and getting people in and getting people aligned at a senior level. Have you got an example where you managed to get very senior people in a room for a sprint when there's pushback from them? Because that's something that is experienced.
Yeah. So what I do with senior people is, because I assume that when those people get together for the first time, let's say it is a sprint environment and they're getting together for the first time, I assume that they think they need to do the job that they think they need to do, which is to have an opinion about everything, right? So if you're a senior person in a company, almost by the nature of that role, you're expected to have a perspective and make decisions, right? That's what you get paid for. You get paid to have a perspective. You're a domain expert or you're a key decision maker. And so you're getting paid to do that. So senior people showing up for a design sprint on day one are going to bring that. They're going to show up with that. What I do is I interview all those people before the design sprint. So the pre-work, which is, I think, as you guys will know, the most important thing you can do for a design sprint is, what do you do leading up to that design sprint? And the pre-work for me is go and interview each of those people one-on-one, let them speak their opinions and express their point of views so that I can understand what they're walking into. And also they have an opportunity to have expressed that before they walk into the room. So then they may not feel like it's necessary to share that. So I'll start the session by saying, thank you, all of you. I've had an opportunity to meet with you. I've heard all of your concerns. I've heard your intentions. I've heard what your boundaries are. Those might be their OKRs and things like that. And I've also heard what you would like to get out of this design sprint. And so I've already heard from a lot of you. And what we want to do today is get alignment around what those things are. And that frames that as saying, I've heard you, I care about you, I understand what you've said. Now is our opportunity not to be defensive about those points of view, but rather find alignment around those things. So that pre-work is critical. And you can do this in any environment. You don't have to just do it with senior people. You can do it with any kind of influences in your organization. You might have a very, very tough to crack engineer or designer who's got a strong opinion on something. Go and interview them before the session. Get their opinions on all those issues before you start the session, so that it's not hijacked by, a bomb that they throw into the room, at the start of the design sprint or whatever kind of deep dive you're doing.
Cool, that was a really good answer. It's always a tough one to do. It happens frequently.
Did that satisfy you?
It did. I really enjoyed that. Loads of knowledge.
And if you do, and by the way, if you do design sprints with like senior executives of big companies, I've done sessions where we've had C-level executives from like billion-dollar companies. Mm-hmm. Interviewing them beforehand is the only way you're going to get through that day. Trust me. There's no other way around that.
Butter them up. Cool. I think we've got time for one more question. So we've got a question from Martin Wilson. If you have multiple products in your organization, would you recommend sales and marketing for each product is embedded within the product team, or having one functional sales and marketing team for the company that services all products, or a hybrid?
Again, Martin, I think it depends on the size of the company, but ideally, you would have, depending on, let's assume that for a minute that your products all have different customers. If they all have different customers, then you're definitely going to need different sales motions. And in that case, you're going to need different marketing and sales. If, however, all of your products have the same buyer and user, then you can have a single marketing and sales team embedded with your product people, because the buyer motion, the sales motion is going to be the same. It's just a different set of products. So similarly at InVision, we've got, our key buyers are the people on the design team, the product design team. And so those people are generally buying the same stuff from us, even though it's different products. So we can have a single sales team, a single customer success team, a single marketing team. But if you're Tesla, for example, and you've got multiple products, then each of those products is a different buyer. The person that buys the Model X is not the same person that buys the Model S. So you may want to have a slightly different way of reaching those people. And maybe Tesla's not the best example, but you get the idea. Like, different teams are dedicated when the customer is different, not when the product is different necessarily.
That's great. Thank you so much, Richard. That's a lot of questions answered. To all those people who did not get their questions answered, we'll try and address those after the session, and we'll put them up for you.
Sounds like a blog post, John.
Yeah, it does sound like a blog post. Might well be in touch, Richard. Brilliant. Thank you so much for your time today, Richard. Thanks so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks for coming. Many background applause.
See you guys.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
But it's not over yet.
It's not over yet.
It's not over yet.
Oh no!
Even though Rich is gone, Rich is left.
Oh God, he's gone. It's just us. It's just time left to say thank you to our guest today, Richard Banfield from InVision. He's been an absolute legend. Thank you to our collaborators at Silicon Brighton. And also thank you to you guys for coming. Without you, there would be no event as well. So thank you very, very much. Wait, guys, did we say at the start of this that there is going to be...
Don was talking about gifts, I think.
An extra special, extra special announcement. So if you're hungry for more Product Unleashed goodness, like this pie-faced man here, we will shortly be doing another event. So next slide, please, Maestro. Our next event is on the 29th of January. We're just going to leave this up for a minute. You can QR it, and we'll also send this out to you guys as well afterwards. Please do not make Shia LaBeouf any more angry. What are you waiting for? Do it. That would be great. And also, double special announcement as well.
Something else.
Oh,
Something
else. Hey.
So off the back of all this, we decided that we set up a Mighty Networks community place for Product Unleashed, and that's a place that we're going to have as a private kind of network for everybody that's joined today to come and have a chat, meet each other, grab lots of free resources, get hold of Richard's slides, which is going to be the next thing on there.
Richard's
as well.
Slides will be uploaded,
and keep up to date with all the different types of events we do. I think we're really excited about this, just having a nice place where you can share knowledge and get to know each other and share things like different types of jobs in product and all types of stuff. So look, if you would like to be involved with that, scan the QR code. We will send out the link straight after this this session.
Community.productunleashed.com. There, absolutely. Come and join the conversation. We'd love to see you there. And
exactly.
Brilliant, guys. Until next time.
Perfect.
Product Unleashed. I think we're out. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks everyone for tuning in. Take care until next time.
Awkward Zoom wave.
Wave.